Okay, good morning, Dr. Shashank Chaturvedi, Director, Institute of Plasma Research, Ahmedabad, Professor Srinivasan Ramakrishnan, President of Indian Physics Association and Director of Tata Institute Fundamental Research, Dr. Sunil Rai, Vice Chancellor, UPES, school teachers and school students. I am Dr. Devesh Avasthi, Dean R&D at University of Petroleum and Energy Studies. We have a wonderful program for you lined up. We at UPS are initiating a science series consisting of 6 lectures by renowned scientists of India and abroad, especially for school students and teachers. This activity is in association with Institute of Physics IOP UK, Indian Physics Association IPAA, and Indian Association of Physics Teachers IAPT. I am sure the school students and teachers will enjoy the lecture series. I will also like to announce that there will be quiz at the end of lecture series on 7th of August based on the questions from lectures and school level science knowledge. Two quizzes are planned separately. One quiz is for school students and the other quiz is exclusively for teachers. The students and teachers attending the lectures are welcome to participate in the quiz. E-certificates will be given to all the participants who attend at least 4 out of 6 lectures. Prizes for both quiz are sponsored by Indian Physics Association and Institute of Physics UK. And today is the first lecture of the series by Dr. Shashank Chaturvedi. And to begin with, I like to request Dr. Sunil Rai, Vice Chancellor of UPS, to welcome the speakers and participants. I'll brief about Dr. Rai. Dr. Rai did MTech in Computer Science Engineering from IIT Bombay and PhD from BITS Pilani. He has been in Indian Navy for 21 years, 19 years in academics, and couple of years in corporate world. He has been Vice Chancellor as Kaziranga University. He has led outcome-based relationship with renowned international institutions, including Virginia Tech, Ulster University in Netherlands, ITN France, and Kansas State University, Atlanta, USA, for offering joint programs in India and conducting research. Dr. Rai is also a member of Board of Advisors Outreach Program of Virginia Polytech University, Blacksburg, USA, and is the co-founder of the Cambridge Global Partners, Edinburgh, UK. So with this small introduction, I would like to request Dr. Sunil Rai to please address the participants.
Good morning, all present on this seminar. Good morning, everyone. At the outset, I would like to congratulate the organizers for organizing this wonderful event on physics. And I would share some of my thoughts as to what do I have learned and how physics has really benefited me. This is more from the younger students who are on the event today. It's our proud privilege that we have got three illuminaries, I would say, of the physics discipline, the learning physics discipline. Dr. Shashank Chaturvedi sir, Professor Ramakrishnan sir, and I welcome you both, learned leading physicists of the country and the world, to address the students and the physics teachers. And of course, we have our own Dr. Avasthi, who is our Dean Research. And again, he's because he's such a humble person, he will never talk about it, unlike Sunil Rai, where I will, of course, boast about a lot of things which I may or may not have done. But Dr. Avasthi is named in the top 2% scientists in the world, top 2% researchers in the world. So we are really proud that this event is being addressed by three luminaries and being attended by all the physics teachers. I have a very special place in my heart for physics teachers because my favorite teacher from my school, I went to a school called Sainik School, Riva, before joining the National Defense Academy. My favorite teacher in school, Sri Pritam Singh Channa, was from physics. My person who taught me sports in school, Sri B.R. Chaudhary, was from physics. The person who influenced me a lot in NDA, again, Dr. Nagpal was from physics. So that way, and in the Navy, the person who influenced me most also was Dr. Ramanuj, was also from the area of physics. And now I'm, of course, have got my ardent partner, Dr. Avasthi, also from physics. So a lot of physics in my life. To me, physics, I think, is something which is a science about how to make things happen. Physics teaches us about how to make things happen. Without physics, there wouldn't have been any engineering, there wouldn't have been any kind of movement. All of you would have heard about that, cliche and very famous statement, give me a strong lever and a place to stand and I can move the world. It's really true, the world is actually moved by the knowledge we learn of physics. I learned mathematics from my, of course, maths teacher. I remember, there are a lot of school teachers, and I remember my school teachers more than my college teachers, and it's a diminishing return after that. So the school teachers remain foremost, and this must be true of all of us on the call. We can, as I speak, I can see Chaudhary sir and Channa sir right in front of my eyes. Channa sir is no more in this world. Chaudhary sir is still there. But we learned mathematics. I learned from Dr. J.B. Singh, who was our maths teacher. But I understood maths. Understand the difference. I learned it from my maths teacher, but I understood it from Channa sir. What is the real meaning of calculus and how it is put to work? It is the physics people who tell you, how the complete knowledge. So it's not about just the falling apple and understanding the law of gravitation. After that, it's important that how this law of gravitation, which works in almost anything and everything that we do, laws of friction, laws of motion, all these are actually which are in our day-to-day life. We don't even realize that it's all coming into play and we are using them so profoundly. So I think physics is something which is so close to life. That's why it is physical physics. It is not something which is in the air. So I think that is why physics assumes a lot of importance. Because of continuing from my experiences, this is more for the school children. I had been a good student of physics, and I will just prove it. Of course, the highest marks obtained in my class in physics was me. Those days, 85% was very high, sir. In 60s, in 75, in All India Higher Secondary Board, to get 85 was almost, I just missed the All India merit by 0.01%, something like that. These days, of course, things start at 98, but those days, I think we were quite good when we were at about 85. So that knowledge, now I'm sharing this not to sing my bravados here, but it is basically to tell you that it helped me a lot when I was writing my UPSC exam, which I stood third in All India in the NDA merit list exams. I think it was basically my sound grounding, thanks to Channa sir, in physics, which has saw me through in the competitive exams. Even for young children, if you're taking any kind of these competitive examinations, particularly you want to go abroad, if your understanding of physics is sound, please take it from me, certified, guaranteed that you will do well in all those examinations. So that was something which physics did to me as a student. So when I joined the Indian Navy, and then of course, I was an engineer in the ship, and I was a good mechanical engineer. And I could become a good mechanical engineer and practice good mechanical engineering only because of my sound understanding and appreciation of physics. Just to sing a little more of about myself, as I said, there's a little boasting management professors do. I have shifted from technology to management when I joined SPJN in 2000. So basically, till today, till about the last exam, that means this semester exam that happened at INS Shivaji Lonavala, I continue to hold the highest marks for thermodynamics, which is 94%. That I think is again because of my excellent knowledge, excellent understanding and love for physics. And it has come to me many times, whether I was attending to my turbo supercharger, which was not giving way, or servo air compressors, when I was working as a marine engineer on a ship called Nideshak, and we were off Trincomalee in a storm, when everybody was actually losing heart. Something was telling me at the band that no, the things can be made to work. This whole jazba of making things work comes from physicists. So I just thought I will share a few of my experiences that in life, even in life, that thinking about life itself, first thing I think about is जिसको बोलते हैं ना हवा में बातें नहीं करनी. So if I come up with a proposal, I actually think about it. How will it that proposal see the daylight? How will it be manifested? How will it actually work? This whole spirit of making things work, I think, comes from that my love and appreciation for physics. If I say anything more, people may feel that I am the agent of physics, selling physics to all of you. So I will not tell anything more on that. And of course, that we will all wait to hear the illuminaries who are on the call. And of course, I can see on the call that some people want to learn about plasmas and astrophysics and all. Of course, there are people who are much more knowledgeable than me to talk about it. And I'm sure these all will be covered. But all these are variants of physics only, whether you talk of quantum mechanics. And look at all the greats have all come from that area, whether it was Max Planck or it was our great Einstein. I mean, they are all the people who are practicing physicists right from the times immemorial, from Archimedes till today. What we saw, these are all physicists that we are going into space all because of physics, and of course the resolve of the human brain. So I wish this particular event all the very best. I welcome Dr. Shashank sir, Dr. Ramakrishnan sir, to address this particular, and I of course pay my respect to all the teachers who are on the call and all the lovely students. I salute you. And you will worry that as to why is the ex-Navy commander saluting all the students. There is a very strong reason why I'm saluting you. I'm saluting you because when we were people on the call here, Shashank sir, Ramakrishnan sir, Avasti sir, myself, when we were going to school, we were told that you are from the third world country, underdeveloped country, and nobody used to take India seriously. Though we had C.V. Raman Saab, we had others who had actually proven to the world many times, but still we were considered as underdogs, underdeveloped. You, my friends, today are the proud citizens of the third largest economy in the world, going to be the largest economy by 2035, surpassing China. Today, you are part of that nation which builds each and everything right from pin to spacecrafts. You are part of that nation which knows how to build their own medicines. They know how to look after their own agriculture. And today we are in a place where the entire world looks at us. So WHO goes on record to say, if you want to learn how to, don't listen to the social media gimmicks here and there. India has already vaccinated much more than anybody else could vaccinate in the world. We have almost vaccinated entire America. So, and where if America says they have vaccinated 60%, there's still 60% of us. So you are going to be the proud citizens of this great nation that we all had been privileged and blessed to be born here. And you will take this nation further. And I have a lot of hopes on all of you, dear school children. And therefore, I am saluting you. With this, I wish you all the very best. Be healthy, be safe, and all the very best to this event and to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sunil Roy, sir, for sharing the excitement in physics and giving inspiring words to students. So now it's time that I would like to request Professor Ramakrishnan for an inaugural address. Before that, it is my privilege to brief about him. He is currently director of Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, the prime institute of country, and he is also the president of Indian Physics Association. Professor Srinivasan Ramakrishnan did his MSc Physics in IIT Madras in 1979 and PhD in 1985 at TI Fire Bombay. Subsequently, he joined TFR as a faculty in 1985, and currently he is distinguished professor. He is one of the well-known low-temperature physicists in India and internationally known. And his laboratory is the only place in the country where one can do experiments over 7 decades of temperature from 400K to 40 microkelvin in microkelvin regime, basically ultra low temperatures. These experimental facilities are set up in his leadership. He has authored more than 300 publications in reputed international journals. He has won many international and national awards, which exemplify his excellence in research. These include Bessel Research Award bestowed by Alexander Humboldt Foundation of Germany, CSPS Award given by Japanese Physical Society, Young Scientist Award by Indian Physics Association, to name a few. He is the current president of IUPAP C5. This is basically for the low temperature physics. He's in the advisory panel of prestigious international conferences and heads a Department of Science and Technology Committee for Evolution of Projects in the area of magnetic field and low temperature. He is director of the TIFR, which I already mentioned. With this, I express my gratitude for him to spare time for us and for the students for this inaugural address. I also take this opportunity to thank him for sponsoring the quiz prizes by IPA. So let me request Professor Ramakrishnan for his inaugural address.
Thank you, Dr. Awasthi. Good morning to dear students, teachers, and friends. The Indian Physics Association is glad to be part of this inaugural event, and I'm glad that I'm addressing all of you today. And you all heard an inspiring speech from the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Sunil Roy, about the importance of physics. I don't have to say more than that. I will just briefly introduce you the Indian Physics Association, commonly known as IPA. It was established in 1970, has been an active platform for 50 years, and has facilitated interaction with the physics community in India through many different channels. IPA has more than 3,500 members with 45 chapters. The main aim of the IPA is to do advancement, dissemination, and application of knowledge of physics in our country. So this is achieved through publication of bulletins, reports, informing new developments to a wider community. Arranging seminars, special programs, lectures for students, teachers, and young researchers is also the main area of IPA. IPA also gives award to young and senior scientists and liaises with other national and international physics societies. IPA events, lecture announcement, and IPA news bulletin and physics news are available in the website of the IPA. You are welcome to go and have a look at it. We also use the social media like Facebook and Twitter to announce important lectures and conferences where IPA is involved. You can also see the previous lectures on an IPA YouTube channel. So that is about the IPA part. So then we come back to the important question, which was also partly addressed by the Vice Chancellor. The main question for these young students is that why do you want to do science? There are many other lucrative things which are there, and why do you want to do science? I think some of you, or probably many of you, would also wonder, as Dr. Roy put it, many of the things, one needs to understand the physics, how the universe came into existence, so-called the Big Bang Theory. How does, what is the nature of the subatomic particles? What kind of interactions we have? What is known as the Standard Model. And you must have heard about this God's particle discovery at CERN in Geneva. These are areas which are closely related to the fundamental research. But there is another aspect of it. It's not fundamental research is only important. The application of these basic research results, which comes with an excellent engineer's support, comes in deliverable products. Everything today we are taking for granted. Many technological inventions which you use in a house, or nowadays you talk about ventilators, liquid oxygen, CT scan, MRI, and so on. You would see in the TVs. All of them came from the basic understanding of physics and other branches of science. Without them, you wouldn't have had this kind of advancement in your life. So it is important that one has to do basic research, but at the same time, look out for things where this basic research can translate into useful products. I mean, I'm glad that today we are going to have a lecture on plasma physics and its technical applications, and that is a very good beginning, if I may say so. And I'm delighted that 4 different organizations are involved today in the inaugural lecture. University of Petroleum and Energy Studies, IPA, IOP, as well as the IAPT. And all these are very important organizations which are helping the science take roots in this country. For over 2 decades, IPA and IOP organize Baba Cockcroft Watson Exchange lectures. These are lectures given by eminent physicists from both sides, both India as well as in UK, used to take place in alternate years. And we are very happy to collaborate with IOP on this venture. And some of you may know that the government of India, in a unique effort, organized this mega science expedition before this pandemic era. And I believe that this kind of outreach effect will happen with the beginning of this series, and I'm sure that we are going to take it forward so that many students would be exposed to different applications of physics coming from the basic research area. Today we are fortunate that Professor Shashank Chaturvedi, Director IPR, has kindly agreed to give the first talk in this series. I wish this series all the success, and we look forward to a vibrant IPA Dehradun chapter. Thank you. Over to Mr.
Thank you, Professor Ramakrishnan, for briefing us about the activities of Indian Physics Association, and we will definitely look forward, initiate definitely the chapter in Dehradun for this IPA, and we'll do the needful in this direction. And I, along with Dr. Sunil Roy, personally would like to invite you and Dr. Shashank Chaturvedi to come to UPS Dehradun whenever possible. And the students, vibrant students, will be very, very interested to interact with all of you, with both of you, whenever possible. And interacting on Zoom is a different thing, and face to face is more excitement for the students. So now, and again, once again, that you could spare the time for us in your busy schedule. Thanks for that. So now I would like to request Dr. Shashank Chaturvedi for his lecture. But before that, it is my privilege again to say a few words about his career. Dr. Shashank Chaturvedi got his BTech in chemical engineering from IIT Delhi, where he was awarded the silver medal for standing first in the department. He then got his PhD in chemical engineering from Princeton University, USA. His PhD work involved the computational study of novel nuclear fusion reactor concept. He was awarded the Homi Bhabha Science and Technology Award of the Department of Atomic Energy in 2005. He is fellow of engineers and senior professor in Homi Bhabha National Institute. He has earlier served as head computational analysis division in Bhabha Atomic Research Center, DRC. He is presently serving as director of Institute of Plasma Research, Gandhinagar, Gujarat. This is the biggest lab of plasma in the country. And basically for the students that, the energy could be generated by fusion and fission. Fission is well known by nuclear reactor and is the dream. And this is where he is working on. His team of large number of scientists, they are working in Gandhinagar and collaborating with the international projects elsewhere. He is presently serving as director. His research interests include numerical modeling of pulse power and plasma system, including magnetic hydrodynamics, radiation hydrodynamics, high speed, high impact and shock waves, pulse, high performance computing, theoretical and experimental determination of materials property under extreme conditions, and automatized processing of signals, voice, image, and video data analysis. So this is a brief introduction of him. With these words, before I request Dr. Shashank, I would like to display one slide. Siddharth, display the slide which tells about the general instructions to the students. Siddharth, could you display the slide, please?
Sir, it is there already, right?
Okay, yeah. So students can share their questions in Q&A option available in Zoom, bottom part of the Zoom link. It will be addressed at the end of the talk. Participants are requested to attend questions in the feedback poll scheduled at the end of this session. Participants attending minimum 4 out of 6 lecture only will receive e-certificates. At the end of all 6 talks, there will be a quiz program separately for students and teachers on 7. So all of the school teachers and students are welcome to attend the lectures and participate in this quiz. And there are prizes for the winners in this quiz. So with this now, may I request Dr. Shashank to deliver his lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Awasthi. I'd like to thank UPS, IIPT, and IPA for this opportunity to share. Let me try sharing my presentation now. Can you see this on the screen now?
Can actually go in the right, perfectly fine, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'll be talking about the technological applications of plasmas. Let me first give a brief introduction, a one-slide introduction to the institute I'm working in. This is the Institute for Plasma Research. It's an aided institute under the Department of Atomic Energy, located technically in Gandhinagar, but we are just next to Ahmedabad. This is just a picture of the front of the institute out here. There are many programs going on here. The main focus of the institute has been in developing our tokamaks, which I talk about, for trying to achieve nuclear fusion as a way of producing electricity. As part of that program, IPR first built India's first tokamak called Aditya. That was became operational in 1989, followed by the SST-1 tokamak, then Aditya Upgrade, which was an upgrade of the first machine. Most recently, we are the nodal agency for India's participation in a mega science project called ITER. That's the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor. Almost the entire industrialized world has come together at a site in France. Hopefully, will be the world's first fusion reactor. Now, because we are developing these fusion devices, we need to develop a lot of technologies. So IPR has an active program in developing technologies for nuclear fusion. There's a separate program on spin-offs. Lots of the technologies we develop for plasmas and fusion, they have direct applications in everyday life. So I'll be talking about that. In fact, this talk will focus more on those applications. And most recently, IPR is one of the agencies in India trying to develop the LIGO project. There's an observatory which is going to come up in Maharashtra. So IPR is one of the agencies contributing to that. Okay, now let me first give a quick introduction to plasmas. Now, as Dr. Ramakrishnan said very nicely, Science is basically about understanding natural processes. You're trying to understand how things happen, why they happen in a certain way. And technology is about applying this understanding for human benefit, trying to get something useful out of it. So what's plasma? Now, the standard answer you'll get if you go to any website or ask people, people say it's the fourth state of matter. But as a matter of fact, plasma is a lot more than just the fourth state of matter. 10% or more of the known universe is in the plasma state. Plasma is all around us, everywhere. And therefore, plasma has many applications, including its application as a potentially unlimited energy source. It could provide energy for maybe centuries to come or even more. So that is why, because it has so many applications, not just in producing energy, but lots of daily applications, we need to understand plasmas and then apply that knowledge. So quickly, how do you get to a plasma? You know that there are three states of matter. That you can have a solid state like ice, you heat it, you get a liquid state, that's water, liquid water. You heat it further, you get the third state, that's water vapor or steam. If you keep heating this further, you get to the fourth state, that's plasma. So basically, as you keep adding energy, you go from solid to liquid to vapor to plasma. Now, just a question to ask, is plasma actually the fourth state of matter? If you think of it, since most of the universe is actually plasma, you should probably call it the first state. All the other states are really condensed states which came out of it. Now, how old is plasma technology on Earth? You see, we are used to thinking of plasma as being something exotic, but it's really all around us. Think of the Stone Age. Mankind gained control over fire. You use a flint, light a fire. A fire actually is a very low temperature, a very weakly ionized plasma. So right from the Stone Age, we've been dealing with plasma without really knowing about it. Historically, first identified in a Crookes tube by Sir William Crookes in 1879. He actually called it radiant matter because there used to be light coming out of it. In 1928 then, Irving Langmuir named it plasma, which actually means moldable substance, something which you can change, which you can modify. So here you can see there's a small video of a Crookes tube, you can see plasma being formed. Now, in India, Professor Meghnad Saha formulated what is called the Saha equation, which many of you might have heard about. It determines if you have a mixture of materials and you heat that, turn it into a plasma, what different kinds of charge states you'll get, which of the elements will turn into a plasma, how ionized they'll be, and so on. So we have a very strong Indian link with the history of plasmas. Now, what is the plasma? Actually, think of the simplest atom you have, the simplest element, that's hydrogen. You know the hydrogen has a nucleus, is just a proton, and you got an electron going around it, like here. If you keep heating it, all that happens is this electron gains a lot of energy, it gets knocked away from the nucleus. What you land up with is a mixture of hydrogen ions, which are basically protons, and free electrons. This mixture of electrons and ions is what we call a plasma. So this picture shows you what is a hydrogen plasma. And of course, when you have these plasmas, you have a lot of radiation process going on and so on. So a plasma made out of, if you heat hydrogen gas, will actually consist of hydrogen atoms, which we call neutrals. It will consist of some protons, that are hydrogen ions, and a bunch of free electrons. All these coexist. It's not as if the electrons have been taken away. They all coexist in one place. So a plasma contains ions, electrons, and neutrals, but macroscopically, if you look at it from the outside, it is electrically neutral. As long as you keep it hot, keep giving it energy, it will remain a plasma. You remove the energy source, it will go back into the gaseous state. Now let's see what happens in a plasma. Plasma is basically, now you've got a mixture of charged particles, electrons and positively charged ions. Now you know that charged particles, when they're exposed to a magnetic field, they experience a force. If you have an electron, that it goes down the magnetic field in a certain direction. If you have an ion, it goes down the other way. Of course, since the ions are much heavier than electrons, they go slower. Just see a small video. The big spheres are the charged particles, the ions. The small ones are the electrons. They gyrate in different directions. The ions move very slowly. They get deflected in the field. The electrons really go tightly around the magnetic field. Now see the magnetic field lines. The electrons tightly hug the field lines. The ions can take bigger orbits around that because they're much more heavy than electrons. So this is what happens in a plasma when you put a magnetic field. So just an example, let's go back to a flame as a plasma. Is a flame a real plasma? Now there's some flames which contain plasma, some flames don't. Technically, we call it a plasma only when there are enough free electrons and ions in the flame and they start behaving together. Let's give an example. If you have if you look at the bottom of this flame, the bottom has it has a high temperature. You have a lot of charged particles there. This part behaves like a plasma. The upper part, where the density is lower, there are fewer electrons, there are fewer free ions, it doesn't behave like a plasma. So if it's a plasma, does a flame get affected by electric or magnetic fields? Let's look at it. If you put a few tens of thousands of volts of voltage, it can bend the flame. If you put a magnetic field, a flame gets quenched. Just see a video of these things. Subjected to an electric field. You see, so when you are subjected to an electric field in the vicinity, the flame gets distorted. Let's see what happens if you put a flame in a magnetic field. You put a solenoid. Now I'll switch on I'll run the video. You'll see what happens to the flame. I switch on the magnetic field, the flame starts responding to that. This clearly shows that there are charged particles in the flame, and there's many of those particles, there's a plasma there, which gets affected by electric and magnetic fields. So this gives you a rough idea of how a plasma behaves. Left to itself, a gas would not respond to a magnetic or electric field. Okay. Now, just to give you a perspective about plasmas, like I mentioned early on, more of the universe might actually be plasma. See the enormous range of densities and temperatures covered by a plasma, where you have plasmas. The x-axis on this plot shows you the number density of particles, how many particles you have per centimeter cube. And on the y-axis, you have the temperature in degrees. So the temperature here is going from, say, a few thousand degrees to a few 100 million degrees. The density is going from very low densities, much lower than the density of the atmosphere, to around 1 particle per centimeter cube, just having one atom or one electron in 1 centimeter cube, and going all the way to 10 to the 30. So these are all orders of magnitude and density. You see plasmas cover almost the entire range. You have the aurora, the northern lights, at low temperatures, few thousand degrees and low density. You have a flame, which I've just shown. You have neon signs, fluorescent tubes, neon signs, which are out here, around 10,000, 20,000 degrees. You have the solar corona, which is about 1 million degrees and still low density. Just to put this in perspective, the density of air is around 10 to the 19 particles per cc. Out here, the air is marked on this x-axis. So solar corona is also very low density, but high temperature. Fusion, that is the kind of machines we are trying to make at IPR, and that is being used. We are trying to aim at nuclear fusion, producing energy. It's a device called a tokamak, which is out here. It will have a temperature of 100 million degrees or more, and densities still less than that of air, about 1 million times less than that of air. Thermonuclear weapons, like hydrogen bombs, they are sitting out here, around the same temperature as our fusion devices, but densities are even higher. Inertial fusion, which is another way to achieve fusion, which is very high density, very high temperature, the core of the sun, and finally lightning, which you see every day. So you see, there are orders of magnitude in terms of temperature. No other state of matter about plasma. And so that is why when you look at plasmas, the kind of things you can make out of them, the kinds of applications you can put them to, it varies enormously, because I can make a plasma out of any material. I can, right from hydrogen to uranium, I can make a plasma. I can put that plasma at very high or very low temperatures and very high or very low densities. So the properties are different. That's why you can do so much with the plasma. Okay, so let's see how you make a plasma. The simplest way is how do you make a flame? You just give energy. You provide thermal energy, you can get a plasma. See a video. You got a burner, you got a gas, you add some energy to it, it starts burning. The burning itself releases energy, and that's what propagates the flame. So heating something, I can also create a plasma by applying an electric field. You can have an electrical discharge, like you have in a fluorescent tube, for example. So you can see a video here. I hope it's visible there. You have a spark between two electrodes that creates a plasma. The spark plug which you have inside your car engine, that has a plasma. You can also produce a plasma by adding optical energy. For example, by hitting a target with a high power laser, you can get a plasma. Let's see a video of this. There's a pulse laser. You shine it on a target. Every time you dump energy with the laser, you create a plasma. You can also create waves, for example, microwaves. So there are things called microwave plasmas. You fill up a gas in a thing, expose it to microwaves, like you have from a microwave oven, you'll get a plasma inside there. So all different ways of producing a plasma. Energy, electrical energy, optical energy, radio frequency heating. So this is some example of man-made plasmas. Earlier I showed you mostly natural plasmas. You can have plasmas which go into a spacecraft propulsion systems, which are currently used in satellites for attitude control. These are called thrusters. These are low temperature plasmas. So plasma you can have. You have tokamak plasmas, which I'll be showing about a little more later in the attempt to produce fusion. You have things called dusty plasmas. Plasma which are made out of macroscopic particles which get charged, which is actually dust. So these are dusty plasma, it's a different class, which has very interesting physics behind it. You can have sparks, arcs, which occur all over the place. For example, if in the dark, if you switch off you turn off a switch, when a current is already flowing there, you'll see an arc inside there. That's the plasma forming. You can have plasma discharge tubes. You have neon lamps. Plasma is used for night lighting and plasma torches. Just some examples of man-made plasmas. Now, the question, one interesting question is, what gives a plasma its color? Because you see plasmas in very different colors. Now, this color comes out of photons. Finally, color comes from photons which are reaching your eye. These photons are emitted when electrons recombine with ions. You've got a charged particle, an electron recombines, that relaxes some energy. Or it could be an electron which is already bound. It is orbiting around a nucleus. It relaxes from a higher state to a lower energy state. That emits energy. So that can give you all kinds of different, for example, you can see colors coming out from helium plasmas, nitrogen, krypton, oxygen, hydrogen, xenon, mercury. You'll see a range of colors which comes out. And that's the physics behind it. Okay, let's just talk about two different classifications, hot and cold plasmas. Now, think of a fluorescent tube, just a tube light. Now, inside what you've got a glass tube, you've got a mercury plasma, you've got argon inside there. So now what happens is, if you look at the tube outside, it says the temperature is 6,500 degrees, something like that. There'll be some number like that. But when you can touch the fluorescent tube, it's not actually hot, it's pretty cold. So how does it happen? Now, basically what's happening is, in hot plasmas, you have almost 100% ionization. And the entire plasma, the gas there, has been turned into a mixture of ions and electrons. Things like the surface of the sun, in lightning, in plasma welding. These are what are called hot plasmas. But in cold plasmas, like you have in a fluorescent tube, you have a very low degree of ionization. Only 1% of the gas has been ionized. The rest of it is still gas. This is what you have in a fluorescent lamp, a neon lamp, atmospheric plasmas, and so on. Okay. Now let me come to the applications. The biggest application where, most of the people are working in India, around the world, is in a potential application to thermonuclear fusion. Now, you're already aware of nuclear reactors. Now, the conventional nuclear reactors that are there work on a process called fission, where you have a heavy element like uranium or plutonium. It breaks up into two or more parts. The breakup releases energy, and that energy can then be turned into electricity. In fusion, we follow the reverse process. You start with very low mass elements like hydrogen. We are trying to reproduce this process that goes on in the sun. Now, the sun basically deals with only hydrogen, normal hydrogen. But that reacts in a very slow way. You have to heat it to very high temperature and the reaction rate is very low. So on Earth, we can't handle the kind of masses the sun has. So what do? Instead of taking normal hydrogen, we take two isotopes, deuterium and tritium. The fusion of these two, when they come together, they create an intermediate state, which then relaxes into an alpha particle, that's a helium nucleus, and a neutron. You get energetic neutrons. Most of the energy that is released goes out into the neutron, which comes out of the fusion reactor, which can then be used to produce electricity. Now, producing these conditions and sustaining them is probably the most challenging technological task today in the world, which is why almost all the industrialized countries in the world have come together to build a fusion reactor. It's a task too difficult and too expensive for any one country to attempt. So, what is so difficult? Why is it such a difficult and to get energy out of it? The first job is creating such a hot plasma. The temperatures we need are something like 100 million degrees or more. But second point is confining such a plasma. If I've got a 100 million degree plasma, how do I control it? How do I keep it in place? I saw in the chat that was going on, somebody asked, how do you control a plasma? That's indeed one of the major problems with fusion plasmas, controlling. And I have to, when it's so hot, I have to keep it away from the atmosphere. The atmosphere is at room temperature 300 Kelvin. My plasma is at 100 million degrees. How do I keep it away from that? So how do I control jobs? Just to give you an idea, why is a plasma so difficult to complete? I'll just show you a video which is downloaded, nothing to do with us. It shows what happens on the sun. Now remember the sun, how does it confine a plasma? It's got enormous gravity. So all the gas which is sitting there, all the plasma that's sitting there just is attracted towards each other. So even though there's a very high pressure there, there's very high energy release going on, the plasma is not really able to escape. Even then, the plasma does not like to sit there. See this video. This is from a YouTube channel. Just look at the surface of the sun. What keeps happening all the time, continuously. This. So the sun keeps flowing out. There are all kinds of instabilities going on there. The plasma does not like to sit still. No hot plasma likes to sit in one place. So when even the sun has this problem, imagine the problems we face on Earth. The sun at least doesn't have a problem because there's free space around it. But we have to operate our fusion reactors on the atmosphere, next to the atmosphere. So we have to keep the plasma away from the atmosphere. Otherwise, it won't stay hot. So how do we do that on Earth? We use a magnetic field, a very, very strong magnetic field. Charged particles which you have in plasmas, like electrons and ions, they experience a force when they are subjected to a strong magnetic field. So what we do is to create a very strong magnetic field and then create the plasma. The plasma then tends to stick to the magnetic field lines. It gyrates, the charged particles gyrate around the magnetic field lines in what is called cyclotron motion, right? And so that holds the plasma in place. The technique that has been the most successful in trying to produce fusion is a device called a tokamak. It's basically a Russian invention, but then now adopted all over the world. So basically, the basic shape is that of a bicycle tube. It's called a torus. You fill it with gas, you apply an electric field in some way, that gas gets ionized, it turns into a plasma. Now to hold that plasma, you need a very complex magnetic cage. You have to put a magnetic cage around it. You can see all these electromagnets. So they produce very strong magnetic fields. The magnetic fields are of the order of a few Tesla, something like 5 or 7 Tesla or 10 Tesla. Just to put that in perspective, the field of the magnetic field of the Earth is 3 Gauss. 10 to the 4 Gauss, 10,000 Gauss makes 1 Tesla. And here the magnetic fields we're applying are maybe 10,000 times stronger than what you have in the Earth's magnetic field. So we use very strong electromagnets for that. Now, since there's no time to go into details, AlGC has been growing. The successes achieved. This is the y-axis shows what has been achieved in terms of the plasma temperature that's achieved. The x-axis shows another figure of merit. I won't go into that. Look at here. Look at here. The tokamak concept was developed in the 1960s. So it was out here. The first generation of tokamaks in the 1970s, second generation 1980s, where the first temperatures of 100 million degrees were achieved. The third generation, 1990s, 2000 and right up to now. And now the ITER device, which is being built in France, where India is an equal partner. It will be out here. So it's been orders of magnitude increase in the temperature and other figures of merit, the density and the time for which we can confine the plasma. It's been improving by orders of magnitude. So that is why we have great hope that when the ITER machine works, it will be the first demonstration of fusion energy release at a sustained level. Okay. Just 1 or 2 slides about the ITER mega project. It's the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor. This is a picture of the site just a few months ago. This is at the south. It's in the south of France, near a port called Marseille. India has made very major contributions. In fact, some of the first contributions to be introduced there, to be lowered into what is called the tokamak pit, is an Indian contribution called the cryostat. We had a major function just about a year back when it was introduced, and the assembly of this whole machine has now started. ITER components are produced all over the world. The major partners are the US, China, South Korea, Japan, India, and the European Union is one entity. Many of the countries, so UK, which was, and France, Germany, and so on, all coming together as one entity. So all the countries are contributing different parts of it. And we're proud to say that India has contributed the first major component, which has actually been made part of the integration of the ITER project. Just to show you some of the technologies, I won't go into detail. This is why the task is so difficult. On the left-hand side, the ones you are seeing are the things that India has already contributed. Things like the cryostat, neutron shielding, lots of technologies, radio frequency heating, particle beams, cryo distribution, and so on. Right-hand side are technologies which we are not contributing to ITER, but we are developing in India domestically. Okay, just some pictures, just to give you a sense of the scale of the project. The ITER, the entire thing, the entire ITER tokamak will be contained inside what is called the cryostat. It's an enormous steel structure, 30 meters in diameter, 30 meters. Whole thing will weigh about 3,000 tons. This thing has been made in Gujarat at a factory called Larsen & Toubro in Hazira, and it has been sent in sections from there by ship to France. And the sections have then been assembled there. And this shows you the assembly which started last year, in May last year, just about a year back. You can see the first section of that, the base section of the cryostat itself is 1,250 tons being lowered into the tokamak pit. This you can see further, the thing is being lowered. You see the depth of the pit. Remember, the entire thing is 30 meters high. Just to give a sense of scale on the left. And this is a view of the cryostat base lowered into position. Remember the 30-meter big structure, which has been positioned there with an accuracy of 3 millimeters on this entire. And you can see human beings standing there for a sense of scale. Okay, but what I'll talk about now is fusion is of course a major application of plasmas, but plasmas vary enormously in the composition, temperature, and pressure. These different combinations of material, temperature, pressure give you different applications. So at IPR, we've been developing different technologies. Some of them are mature, they've been patented, we've transferred to industry. There's some at the technology demonstrator stage, some intermediate stage, and some are at the R&D stage. We have now started an incubator, technology incubator at IPR, where we are inviting entrepreneurs and startups to come and work with us to develop technologies, take IPR technologies and take them to the market. Let me just give an idea of the range of these things. Their applications in the environment, and I'll be showing, after this, I'll be showing you only pictures and videos, no more text. Their industrial applications, their strategic applications in the space and defense, the social and health applications, and so this is various things that you can do with plasmas. Let's start with the biggest issue. After COVID, everyone knows this is one of the biggest issues we have. That's handling of waste. Because you've been seeing that you have hospitals which are treating COVID patients. There are lots of medical waste being generated, which are very dangerous. You have to get rid of it. But the problem of waste in India has always been there. Because India produces something like 1.4 lakh tons of municipal solid waste per day. There's a large plastic content in that. And there's also medical waste coming out from hospitals. Even in any big city, there's a few tons per day that medical waste, which has to be disposed of in a very eco-friendly way. You can't just burn it. And now all of us know there's a big problem of e-waste. All the PCBs, all the electronic devices discard, that's landing up as waste. How do we get rid of this? The standard way is people used to burn them, but burning can sometimes produce even more dangerous products. There are things called dioxins and furans, which can cause cancer, for example. So it's dangerous to just put them in an incinerator and burn them. What we have come out with is a process called plasma pyrolysis, which is ideal for waste disposal. Very hazardous and toxic materials can be broken down into the elements at very high temperatures. Because remember, plasma has a temperature of 5 or 10,000 degrees or 20,000 degrees. So it does not produce any toxic byproducts. The organic mass you have, right, all the plastics and the medical waste and so on, it disappears. It's turned into gases which you can use, you can produce energy from them. Just to give you an idea, this is the kind of what a plant looks like. And now some of these plants are already set up. We are now in the process of setting up one such biomedical waste plant at the Tata Hospital, the Homi Baba. That will be a 5 tons per day plant, which will be the first indigenously developed biomedical waste disposal plant in the country. And we are hoping that it will cater not just to that particular hospital, but to all of Varanasi. That's the plan. Okay, let me come to a very different application. You can use plasmas to produce what are called super hydrophobic surfaces. Now you are aware that we know that lotus leaves, they remain very clean and water does not stick to them. Why does that happen? It's because if you look closely at a lotus leaf, it has a certain nanostructure there, because of which water droplets and other things don't come and stick to it. Now this is related to a process which you are aware of called surface tension, right? So water droplets, for example, if you put water on a lotus leaf, it will not spread out. It will stay there as a droplet, so it doesn't dirty the leaf. This has lots of, now using this technology, can we make artificial surfaces which have the same property? Okay, so let me show you an example of a self-cleaning surface. Look at two surfaces. On the first one has been treated. So you'll see water drops on it and flows away. It doesn't stick there. On an untreated surface, the water sticks there. The water stays there. And if water stays there, then dirt accumulates on that. Now, so this is a standard thing of cleaning, creating self-cleaning surfaces. Using a plasma, we have used ion irradiation. You can take a surface like Teflon, for example. You can do irradiation with ions coming out of a plasma, and you can produce a very small nanostructure on that. That itself produces what is called a super hydrophobic. Now, you know what hydrophobic means. Phobic means fear. That means a surface on which water will not stick. That's hydrophobic. Super hydrophobic means that water will absolutely not stick to it. The extent to which it will tend to stick is very, very low. Now let me show you a video of what this kind of surface can do. On the left hand side, these are surfaces treated. There's a water droplet falling on it and immediately bouncing off. So depending on the kind of treatment we've done, the droplets will either stick there or they'll bounce off. So we can nicely control the amount, the hydrophobicity of a surface. We can even have a gradient in hydrophobicity. So this is the kind of thing that we can produce. Teflon, which has been nanostructured using a plasma treatment. So this is one idea for using cleaning surfaces, or it can be used for water harvesting from the atmosphere. Let's come to another application. You can use plasmas for producing nanopowders. Now there are many ways for producing nanopowders, but most of them use chemicals. And in those chemicals, then you discard those chemicals which are eco-unfriendly. Why do you want to produce nanopowders? Now, lots of metal oxide nanopowders like zinc oxide, titanium dioxide, and so on. They are heavily used all over. They're used in the pharmaceutical industry. They're used in cosmetic products. They're used in coolants. You have automobile coolants. They can improve the efficiency of a coolant, the lubrication efficiency of coolant, and so on. It also has a very interesting application in everyday life. You know that when you're wearing some tea on it, or coffee or turmeric, it's very difficult to get rid of that stain. You can make self-cleaning surfaces which are coated with titanium, for example, titanium dioxide, using a plasma process. What happens is this thing just interacts with oxygen. So if you simply suppose you've got a shirt which has been dirtied by a coffee or tea or turmeric stain. If the shirt had already been treated with titanium, it's been coated, you can just put it in the atmosphere. After some time, there's a process that goes on, the stain disappears, simply because of a titanium coating. So we are working with some textile industry people to see if this can actually be deployed. Can they make self-cleaning shirts or self-cleaning textiles? So the same kind of thing can be applied for wool and denim, for example. For example, you might have heard of a thing called Angora wool. Now, Angora wool is supposed to be very warm. It's made from the Angora rabbits. This thing. The problem is Angora wool is not, you cannot make fabric out of it because it's very, very smooth. This is untreated Angora fabric. The fibers are very, they don't stick to each other. So you cannot weave them. But you can do plasma treatment of these things and they become slightly roughened without using any chemicals. It's a very eco-friendly process. So these are the kinds of systems in the Kulu Weavers Society, for example. So you can now make 100% Angora fabric. So it's a nice application to the woolen industry, which you see. A third application, which you can probably link with, you know that many of you might be wearing denim. And denim, people like to have faded denim and faded in a particular pattern. Now, normally that's done with laser fading, a process called laser fading, which is pretty expensive. We have a plasma process for doing the same thing. Let me just show you a video. So here we have the monitor. Here you can get the actual shape that you draw on the PC. So the same shape that you draw on a PC can be produced, any shape that you want, using a plasma treating process. So these are applications to textiles. Let's go to a very different application that's in the power generation industry. Now, you know that, for example, you have NTPC, for example, runs a lot of power stations. You have power stations, most of them run on coal. Now, the way the coal works is the coal is fed as a very finely pulverized powder. It's coal particles which are in. Now, when you normally try to start up a boiler, if you go to a power station, to start up a boiler takes some time because the boiler is not hot and coal by itself does not ignite at low temperatures. You need a slightly high temperature, 200 to 300 degrees to ignite coal. What we can do is to add a plasma stage to it. So when you feed the coal particles, they first pass through the plasma part. Now, coal actually consists of some the ash, and it has volatile material in it, things which can turn into gases. The gases come out because of plasma heating, and then it burns much more easily. Let me give you an example of a plasma. So this helps to start up boilers, start up power stations much faster. When you start up a boiler, start up a power station, which could take a few hours, take 2 or 3 or 4 hours, you have some emissions coming out from there, which are not considered very desirable. They are pollutants. Using a plasma process, a plasma preheating for that burner can get rid of all their toxic products. Let me show you an example of a setup we have at IPR. This is the setup. We have a graphite electrode, a plasma arc. Let me show you a video of that. Gases are fed in at one end from this side, and they pass through, and along with coal powder through this hopper, they pass through this region. The plasma heats it, and then the whole thing burns. All the exhaust gases coming out. Let me show you a video of the plasma burning. So what you saw were the two electrodes in there. You saw the gas injection. The yellow part, which is the hottest part, is where the plasma is. The red of it is just the normal burning part. Just another video of the same thing. So you can clearly see the plasma region, which is very hot, because that we are surrounded by a somewhat cooler. Okay, let me come to a very different application now. Plasma-based coatings. Now, plasma is heavily used in industry for making coatings. Let me give you an example of one thing that we did for ISRO. Now, they had a problem of making a very low weight antenna for microwave reflectivity. Now, the normal thing they had was, so what we did was we took a plastic layer, a plastic called Lexan. Right. Now, Lexan by itself is a plastic, so it's not a conductor. So it cannot behave like an antenna, because an antenna must be electrically conducting. So normally you make them out of metal. If you make an antenna like you have your Tata Sky antenna, it becomes too heavy. It's too heavy. So what you can do is take a plastic layer, make a thin coating of metal on it, let's say copper. So this picture shows a Lexan backing plate, and then we do a copper coating on it. Just 8 microns of copper coating on that. And that makes it, turns it into a microwave antenna. So you can make very lightweight antennas out of this kind of thing. Okay. Another application is in hardening materials. You might have seen, if some of you have gone to any factory, you might have seen lathes there, machines which are used for grinding materials, for machining, right? Now those tools which are used there tend to get worn out because they're constantly subjected to friction. So there's a process called plasma nitriding, which is eco-friendly and which increases the hardness of the material to a much higher. It increases the hardness by a factor of 2 or 3. So you have, let's say, a steel tool where only the surface will become very hard. The bulk steel properties will remain. The inside part remains the same. Only the outer part becomes very hard. So it becomes wear resistant. This is how we do plasma nitriding. Right. Let's come to another application of plasma coatings. Now, you might know that you might have heard of people who have problems with their hip joints, which is a pretty common problem, especially as people age. Some of them, the hip joints tend to wear out. Now, you know, the hip joint is basically a ball and socket joint. Now, the ball, you have your thigh bone, which is connected to the ball, which is inside the socket in a hip joint. So often the bone part, that tends to get worn out. Now, and suppose you have a fracture. You might have had some relatives or some friends who had an accident and you have a fracture there. You need to replace that ball. Now, normally people used to use stainless steel balls, but they tend to get worn out very fast because the body has a lot of fluids inside which tend to erode. They cause corrosion there. What we can do with the plasma is to produce different kinds of coatings on them. So this is a normal coating, normal uncoated SS316 ball. You can coat it with titanium or titanium nitride. It becomes like this. Or you can do plasma nitriding multiple layers, which gives this. This tends to increase the wear resistance. So the same ball, when it is implanted in somebody's, can run for a much longer time. This kind of thing, it's now being subjected to trials, to actual body environment similar to what you have in a body fluid. And we are trying to see how much it increases the life of the component. So this can be used to replace the existing implants in bodies. So plasma nitriding can be used to do a wide range of jobs. Let me now come to a biomedical application, something where we are working currently with many medical institutions and so on. There's something called a plasma jet. Let me show you a video. So you see, this is one earlier. You can have it shining on your finger. You don't feel the heat. All you feel is the gas flowing. You feel like there's something there, something touching your finger, but nothing much happens. It's not hot at all. So this is a cold plasma jet. Now we've had some small trials of this in a hospital in Calcutta for trying to cure fungal infections, skin fungal infections, without using any ointment, any medicine. It's just the plasma treatment. Just see an example. So you can just shine it on the surface. You have a plasma jet by the doctor, and it can be, it is run over the region where you have a fungal infection. Now, these fungal infections are pretty common. Normally, they tend to come back also. If you treat them with medicines, they go away for some time, then they tend to come back. So we are working with medical institutes, research institutes to see how reliable this is, for how long the treatment lasts, and so on. Similarly, you can use it for blood coagulation. If you are bleeding somewhere, suppose you are bleeding, normally you know that it takes some time before a clot forms and your bleeding stops. So in some tests we've done, natural coagulation takes about 3 minutes. Now using artificial coagulation agents, it takes around 20 seconds. With plasma treatment, you can bring it down to something like 12 seconds. So again, we are working with medical research centers, because you know that in medical applications, you cannot just start doing these things. They have to go through very careful regulatory approvals before it can be released. So we are working with lots of medical research institutes across the country to work out these things. It can be used for cosmetic treatments, removing black spots. You can, for bleaching of teeth. Any of you have had a root canal treatment, you know how painful that is. Now for sterilizing the region, after the tooth, they bore a hole in a tooth, they get down to the root. To sterilize that, one could use plasmas. Similarly, you can use it for removing pesticides from vegetables. You know, pesticides now are so heavily used. The vegetables can also cause damage to us because they come with the pesticides. So everyone advises you to wash your vegetable very carefully. Plasmas can be used for treating these things. One thing we are working on with an institution, with actually multiple institutions. One is AIIMS in Delhi, there's ACTREC in Bombay, in BARC with the biomedical group, is trying to see if it can be applied. Plasma jet treatment can be applied to different kinds of cancers. We've seen some early progress in these things, but these are very early stage treatments. It seems to be giving some promising results for mouth and throat kind of cancer. But it's very early, so we can't really claim anything yet. Another thing which you might have heard about, especially in this COVID situation, is you might have heard when people get hospitalized, they get hospitalized with some problem, right? Some medical problem. But when they come out of the hospital, suppose they've been there for a long time in the ICU or something, they sometimes come away with some other disease. Now, these are what are called, and that's because ICUs and hospitals, they tend to get infected very, very dangerous bacteria. A lot of the infections come out of devices that are used inside the body, things like catheters. So you know that medical, some patients have to use catheters, and the catheter itself becomes a site for growth of bacteria. What we found is some early good results is that catheter, we can do treatment of these medical devices like catheters. And once you've done that, the growth of bacteria on that surface becomes much lower than it was. So this is again a potentially very interesting thing. We've done it on a small scale. Again, now we have to work with medical institutes to go through all the entire regulatory process. And so on. There are things we could use plasma treated surfaces for detecting very low concentrations of chemicals. We have already made systems for sterilization of medical devices. Very recently, in the COVID, during the last year's lockdown, we made what is called a handheld plasma sterilizer, which we are working with an agency, organization called CCAMP in Bengaluru to commercialize that, which can be, it has been found to be effective against COVID, against other kinds of bacteria and viruses also. So again, that is going through regulatory clearances and trying to come out with a commercial product. We have lots of applications in space systems where we work with ISRO in different things. Some contributions we are making to improving solar panels in satellites. We have at IPR a series of experiments called the Space Plasma Interaction Experiments, SPICS, where we study how solar panels get damaged in space and try to find some way around that. Because the solar wind and charged particles in space, they tend to damage the solar panels. That damage happens and try to suggest some way. Then certain coatings on antennas, metal, like I showed earlier, metal coating on antennas. And more recently, just in the past 2 years, we've started developing indigenous plasma thrusters to see how that will come out with the novel ideas for that and see if we can contribute something to the space program. So just some examples of the systems which are there in IPR for doing various things. Last thing I'll come to, these are plasma applications in aerospace technologies. These have been started just about 2 years back, but they are potentially very interesting. And this is one thing where we would like to invite people to work with us, because we have great experience in the aerospace side. We know plasmas. So plasma thrusters are one thing. Basically, these are not used for launching things from the Earth, because plasma thrusters tend to be very low thrust things. They can produce a thrust of maybe 1 Newton or 100 millinewtons, very low thrust. But they can operate for very long time. They can operate for hundreds of hours or thousands of hours. That is the advantage. So they are typically used in controlling satellites, small changes in the orbits of satellites, controlling the attitude of the satellite towards Earth and so on. So we're developing some novel concepts here at IPR. We have developed You know that a plasma is electrically charged because you have electrically charged particles in there. So it's a good conductor of electricity. So just like you can have antennas made of material, made of wire, for example, or sheath or a dish, you can have a plasma antenna. Let me show you a video of something which is a plasma antenna. It's just a tube filled with gas in which we can change the length of the plasma column. Depending on the length of the plasma column, it acts like a receiver of FM transmissions, normal FM radio. So when the FM radio transmission is being received, you'll see, you'll hear a noise, you'll hear a song, and when it goes into the plasma changes, it goes away. Just see this video. So basically, these are broadband antennas. It covers not just one frequency, but it can receive signals and transmit over a very wide range. So this comes into the class of what are called stealth antennas. When I want to transmit or receive, I'll have this on. I'll just turn off the plasma. So there's no conductor there. Nobody can detect it. Okay. One thing that we are working on now is trying to work with the automotive industry in reducing drag on vehicles. You know that when you have a car or a truck moving at high speed, let's say 80 or 100 kilometers per hour or higher, there's a drag force from the air. There's a friction from the ground and there's drag force from the air, which can become pretty significant. Now, by putting plasma panels on the surface of car, small parts of the car, like I've shown in the diagram here, it can change the flow of air over the surface of the car. That reduces the drag. So we could reduce, say, petrol consumption by 10 or 15%, which is actually a pretty significant thing. We've done it on a small scale. We've done some wind tunnel measurements, but now we have to scale it up and see now we're trying to work with the automotive industry. We've identified some partners to see if it can actually be deployed and tested out in a real life situation. So we have a wind tunnel, we've got a testing facility. This is the kind of, these are called dielectric barrier discharges for producing plasma. It's another way of producing a plasma. We made what is called an airfoil, which is like an aircraft shape. So I'll just show you a video. You'll see air flowing past this airfoil on the surface of this. It's coming from a fan. You'll see that when the plasma is turned on, there's a small glow on the surface. The airflow tends to stick to the airfoil. And when I turn off the plasma, it separates. So the drag force on the airfoil starts increasing. Let's see if I can get the video going. Yeah. This thing that you can see, this is smoke, which we are using for tracing the airflow over the surface. And whenever there's a glow, you'll see there's a plasma that turns on. I don't know if it's very visible to you. You can see the flow coming inside. Okay, I don't know if it's very visible. It's not showing up very clearly here, but you can clearly see a change in the pattern, the way in which the flow takes place. And so this can be used to modify the drag on an aircraft or on a car. Okay, just finally, just 1 minute more, because I think I've already gone over my time. So plasmas cover a wide range of temperature, density, and elemental compositions, which means that the physics and the chemistry changes enormously. In some cases, things are very fast. So transients become important. Things move very fast. The kinetics of things becomes important. Also, because you've got charged particles, electromagnetic forces tend to become very important. So to simulate these plasma, to understand how these plasma work, we need a lot of high performance computing. We do a lot of computational work to understand how these plasma work. So at IPR facility called Antya, and then you do various kinds of simulations with that. So I'll just show an example of a MHD simulation, magnetohydrodynamic simulation, just to show what kind of things we do. And these simulations are as important as the experiments. They actually go hand in hand. They work together to get best results. So this is showing you the actual motion of a plasma inside a tokamak. You're seeing a cross section. And you can see the way different kinds of instabilities, the waves that are developing, the distortions that appear inside the plasma, and so on. Okay, so I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Shashank Chaturvedi. This is a excellent talk, excellent lecture, and you gave a glimpse of basically plasma and its applications, and the fusion, the what kind of things going on, and we have lots of questions actually. So I will go through them, and there are some curiosity-based things also. That, for example, uh, they are asking what are the career opportunities in IPR. So as far as I know, actually the physicists, chemists, and even engineers, they have a lot of opportunities there. But you are a better person to actually respond to that.
Yeah, there are two stages. One is if you want to do a PhD, because we have an active PhD program. So each year we take in students through an exam called JEST, J-E-S-T, which is caters to a lot of institutions around India. So if you can appear in JEST or you can appear in GATE and then qualify for the PhD exam. That is the PhD course. Okay, so that's one stream. And after that PhD, either I mean, if it works out, you could get absorbed in IPR, or you could go abroad or work in other labs inside the country, because you'll get a PhD in physics, plasma physics. The second option, and of course, there are some people who do an MTech here, but that's on the educational side. In terms of the jobs, we have our own. Normally, we run our own. So every year the intake varies from year to year, but it is something like 10 to 15 people a year, which is a mix of both physicists and engineers. So amongst engineers, there'll be mechanical, electrical, electronics for the most part. There are also some chemical engineers, but these are the major disciplines. Otherwise, MSc Physics, you can then get selected. So we advertise. It's like a training school. So you go through that. There's a 1-year orientation course and then get absorbed. We also sometimes advertise for jobs directly. So for example, if you have a PhD already in some area relevant to the work going on at IPR, you could apply against those ads. That's it.
Okay, yeah. So I will read some questions. There are many, some time that to which we can answer the queries. And some of them are actually, there is a question by Aditya Anil. The school name is not coming. So what is magnetic confinement fusion?
Okay. Yeah. Like I told you in the beginning, the point is the plasma that I need in a fusion machine is very hot, right? I have to reach a temperature of millions of degrees, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and so on. Now, if you took a gas and took it to that temperature, the basic issue is you have to keep it away from the surroundings. Otherwise, the surroundings will cool it down because your atmosphere is at 300 Kelvin. So the obvious steel vessel, for example, right? But then the steel vessel itself is, if you subject a steel vessel to a temperature of 1 million degrees, it will tend to vaporize. It will start. So there are two things. One is the plasma will cool down. Secondly, the steel itself. The steel is composed of iron, chromium, nickel, and so on. All these elements will come into the plasma and make it dirty, which I don't want. I want a pure hydrogen plasma. So what we do to keep the plasma away from the steel vessel is to apply a magnetic field. You put a magnetic field in a shape which is parallel. It's like a circular magnetic field which is parallel to the surface of the torus. There was you saw a trickle tube. So I put a magnetic field which is parallel to the surface. Charged particles can freely move along the field line, so they can move parallel to the surface. But if they try to move against across the field, it's very difficult because they experience a strong force. So it's basically a magnetic cage that I prepare, which keeps the plasma away from the surroundings, from the steel. That is why it is called magnetic confinement fusion. There are also other ways of confining a plasma.
Yeah. Okay, so I hope this answers Aditya query. And next one is Darpan Bora. What is dust plasma? Explain in brief.
Yeah. The plasmas that I mentioned earlier, basically we talked about a gas. So I said, for example, suppose you have hydrogen. So you ionize hydrogen, the free separated from the nucleus, right? So it's a mixture of electrons and ions. But also a behavior similar to that of plasmas comes about if you take very small dust particles, right? Suppose you take a very fine powder where the particles of a size of a few nanometers or maybe microns. If you can charge up these particles, if you put an electrical charge on them, these particles and the gas around them, the plasma around them also starts behaving like a plasma. The properties become very different from that of a gas plasma. So that is why it's called a dusty plasma. Where is it significant? People have found that it has lots of applications. Firstly, in industry, right here. Secondly, they believe that in the formation of planets and in, for example, these rings of Saturn and so on. These things, and in planets forming in planet role, but there also you had small particles which got charged. So that is why a dusty plasma also has lots of interesting features.
Okay, thank you. This one question is by Rupanshi. How fire is a plasma? I think you showed very nice experiment on that. That itself shows, but maybe you can just brief that once again, that how fire is plasma.
Yeah. Well, if you have a flame, I showed you a candle flame, for example. Now in that there's a region which is pretty hot, which is actually the part where plasma is likely to exist is actually invisible, right? Because that's the darkest part. The visible part is not so much of it. So if that the degree of ionization, that is the fraction of atoms which have gotten ionized, is pretty high, then these charged particles start interacting with each other. That part starts behaving in a different way from the rest of the flame. So that is the example I showed. If you subject it to an electric field, or put it, let's say you put it between the plates of a capacitor, or put two charged, high voltage across it, it gets distorted. In the same way, if you subject it to a magnetic field, that part gets distorted. So in a flame, some part is just a gas, some part becomes a plasma.
Yeah. So next query is by Saurabh. In how does energetic neutrons generate electricity, given that they are neutral?
Yeah. In fact, you see, I've got my tokamak, the device which is producing fusion. Now, out of the total energy released per fusion event, for each fusion, that is around 17.6 MeV. 14.1 MeV of that, almost 80%, is carried by the neutron, which comes out of the machine. See, because exactly like you said, because the neutron is electrically not charged, it comes out of the tokamak. What we do to stop it is, a plasma cannot stop it. A plasma is very low density, it will not stop that neutron. What we do is to put what is called a blanket around the core where fusion is taking place. Surrounding that is a solid structure, which is called a blanket. Just like you have a kambal, right? In cold weather, you cover yourself with it. Here, I put a blanket around this whole thing. That blanket contains certain elements where the neutron slows down. So the energy of the neutron is given to the blanket. Once the blanket heats up, then it's like any other process. For example, you have a coal-fired plant, you produce energy. It's become hot. You've got hot water. After that, it's the rest of the cycle is the same. I circulate water through the blanket. It turns into steam. Then with the steam, I drive a turbine and produce electricity.
There is a question, Devangana. Do black holes accelerate plasma particles? Although this is not actually touched upon here.
I don't see any reason why they shouldn't. I'm no expert on black holes, but I don't see why not, because they are operating through gravity, which will operate on everything. Yes.
Yeah, right. And Mansi has a query. Is the artificial sun of China made of plasma? Of course, yeah. So you can comment on that, yes?
Yeah. China has actually made very good progress in this. You see, because they have a massive program, a very big program in fusion research program. So apart from contributing to the ITER project, where they are also an equal player like India, they have a domestic program which is very strong, much stronger than in India. Also, for example, I showed you we have 3 tokamaks, right? We built a total of 3 tokamaks. In China, they've had a series of these. So they think indeed they've achieved very good conditions, very close to fusion conditions now. Yes.
So on the application side, now there are some questions. Okay, this is how plasma is useful in food sector. Actually, we are also very fascinated by so many applications, and maybe also we also will come. We plan some application in aerospace, or we are very much interested in utilizing plasma for biosensing applications, and we have some preliminary results as well. So we'll discuss that, and maybe some of us can visit sometime. So in the food sector, you already gave some example, but maybe she asked, so you can just mention once again.
I'll just give one example. There are multiple things. I'll just give an example. For example, we found working with some universities. There's Anand Agriculture University, there's Pantnagar University. There have been some small scale collaborative things. We found, for example, if you take seeds before you plant them, what we are finding are 2 different things. One is, to some extent, it helps in the seed germination. It increases the rate of seed germination. Number 2, the total plant mass that is produced after that, because it's not enough for the seed to germinate. After that, the total product that you get out of it, the crop that you're trying to grow, the amount of that also seems to be somewhat better than the untreated seeds. So assuming that this thing works out, it has to be really taken to a large scale and shown on that scale. If it works out, it could be a nice way of improving performance, because we already have ways of treating seeds on a large scale. You can put seeds on a conveyor belt, keep treating them with plasma, then plant them. So it seems to, that's one. The second is of crops or on the seed cells, you have fungal growth. So after treatment with plasma, this fungal growth or removal of pesticides, for example, from crops which have been grown, plasmas can be used for very eco-friendly removal of these pesticides or to remove fungal growth. So that will increase the lifetime of things. Another very simple example, we recently worked with an industry in Ahmedabad. They, that a very simple thing, you have lemons which are normally stored in a cold storage. Now in a cold storage, the life of a lemon is something like 2 or 3 months. Because after that, there are always fungal infections there, which tend to ground is that if you do plasma treatment beforehand, that life can be extended very substantially. So again, an application to a crop which is already there, which you can treat with plasma to enhance the life.
Yeah, Dr. Shashank, you can stop me anytime because there are so many questions and I'll keep on reading, but you can set up some time of your own that, okay, so you please feel free. So I will keep on asking, but please tell me that up to when you can actually take on.
Yes, another 5 minutes is fine.
Okay, fine. So Anjali Yadav asked if it is manageable to produce plasma, why aren't we producing it? I think we are doing it for the sake of our country, as well as there is a major crisis on it, and that efforts are going on. So that is what you have explained. So I don't think there is any explanation needed on this because at international level, these efforts are going on. And you showed that curve that what I think 500 megakelvin has been
million degrees or so. It's not just the temperature, because it's also the density of the plasma which you are heating up.
Yeah.
I got very low density plasma and heat it to that. You need to achieve certain conditions for fusion.
Right.
It's a question of reaching there.
Yeah. Gaurav asks, are all luminous substances mostly plasma?
I don't think so. Because you've got things even at room temperature which can luminance. You have bioluminescence. You have so many ways of emitting light.
Right.
Plasmas are one thing which emits light. Yes.
Right. There is one question by Darpan. Is this useful in D2O in order to control the drastic reactions?
No. I mean, this has really no connection with that. D2O, that heavy water, is used in fission reactors for moderating neutrons, for slowing down neutrons. Right? Application. So here also we are using deuterium, which basically comes out of D2O. I mean, you can electrolyze D2O, for example, and get deuterium gas. In addition, we need one more isotope, that is tritium. But there's no direct connection. Incidentally, I can mention one thing, that in India, the fission plants are basically used on the design that we use is what is called a pressurized heavy water reactor. Now, in being produced as a byproduct, which is not really required, but it's produced there. That tritium is a very useful input for fusion reactors. It's a fuel for fusion reactors. So there is a connection, but so we can't do anything for fission reactors, but they can do things for us. They can supply tritium.
Yeah. Okay. So then there is another question by Vikhyat Srivastav. If there are questions by the same person, again, I'm avoiding and trying to go for more. Like if we heat vapor, it converts into plasma. Similarly, is plasma convertible to vapor or cooling?
Sure. We take a tokamak and we are going to produce a plasma in it. We start by filling it with gas. So we fill hydrogen gas there, then start an electrical discharge by various means, by applying an electric field to it. But if I stop applying the electric field, it goes back to a gas. You'll get hydrogen gas there again. Yes, it's a reversible thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Varnit Bansal, sir, what can happen if we are unable to control the high energy of plasma?
Nothing, because the stored energy in a plasma, in a tokamak plasma, stored energy there. That's because of the density of the plasma is extremely low. Like I told you, the density is about 1 lakh times lower than that of air. So even though the temperature looks very high, the density is very low. So the total energy in joules which is stored there is not very high. In fact, if we stop heating the plasma, it will immediately cool down. The whole problem is in keeping the plasma hot.
Okay. Darpan is asking about the explanation of ionic propulsion. You explained something for space and everything. Yeah.
See, normally, how do you do propulsion? Let's see the launch from chemical propellants. For example, you might have liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen, which react. Right? They produce water vapor at high pressure, which comes out of at the bottom, and it gives you a thrust. Right? So it's a reaction. So basically, the force that you're exerting is basically the product of the mass flow rate and the velocity of the gases that are coming out, m dot into v. Now, this you can do for launch because you require very large forces to launch, to get out of the Earth's gravitational potential. Once a satellite is already in space, it is already orbiting. All you need to do are to make small corrections, but you need to keep making those corrections slowly, or small correct change in the orbit of the satellite, or maybe on interplanetary missions where you can take your own sweet time. Launch has to be done in a few minutes, but if I'm going from Earth to Mars or Earth to Jupiter, that can be done slowly. So a very low thrust applied over a long time can do the job. That is something which is ideally done using a plasma thruster of different types. Now, basically what happens is, since the plasma is hot, the thermal velocity in the plasma, you might know that if you have a gas and you heat it to some temperature, the average velocity of particles in the gas, of the atoms or molecules, is root kT by m. So the velocity of the particles is related to the square root of the temperature. So in a gas, the temperature is 300. Suppose I've got a temperature of 10,000 degrees. So the square root of T is much higher in a plasma. So if a plasma can be created in the thruster and then made to flow out, I can get a much higher velocity of flow. Now that means I can manage the same thrust with a much smaller flow rate of mass. In a satellite, mass is at a premium because when you launch a satellite, you have to send all that mass into space, right? So if I can produce some gas, put in some gas like xenon, for example, which will a very small mass of it, it can provide a small thrust for a very long time in a satellite. So you can do without chemical propellants there. This is what, if you look at technical terms of a certain fuel. So specific impulse of a plasma thruster is very, very high. It is something like a few thousand seconds as compared to chemical propellants, which will be 200 or 300 or 400 seconds.
Okay. There is a question by a student. Can I do an internship in IPR as grade 11 student? Not me, I mean that is student. He is in grade 11.
So
And
unfortunately, COVID has caused a lot of trouble. Otherwise, we have very regular programs in two ways. One is there's a summer school program. So that is also advertised and you can apply for that. So there are about 50, 55 students typically from all across the country who come for that. Again, that is a mix of physics students and engineering. So we have all kinds. The second is students who want to do their projects. For example, you're doing your BTech or MS, and even PhD projects for that matter. Many of them. So every year we have something like 100 or 125 students who apply. Again, for that on our website, there's a link. It's called academic projects. You can click on that. All the projects available are displayed. And you can then directly say that you're interested in some of them. Then you can directly communicate with the scientist who's offering those projects. So yes.
So maybe I'll take just one or two questions more and then we'll stop. And there is a question, how will be able to create fusion similar to the sun's? How many heavy elements will be formed in this process?
Well, right now we are only aiming at one kind of fusion, that is the deuterium plus tritium reaction, because that is the easiest to produce, the lowest temperature it produces. Now you can go beyond this to pure deuterium reactions, D plus D. But unfortunately, the temperature required for that is even higher. Now we are having a hard enough time just getting to the conditions for DT, but in the future, maybe if it works out, you could have D, there's a D reaction, in which case we would not require tritium at all. Tritium is an artificial element. We would not, so from seawater, you can essentially produce almost unlimited amounts of deuterium. There's another mixture called deuterium helium-3. Helium-3, there's a lot of it on the moon. Sometime if you could start mining helium-3 on the moon, deuterium is available here. That is an intermediate. So the most easy thing to do is DT, which we are doing. The next step might be D helium-3. And in the future, sometime DD reactions. These are three things, but only hydrogen isotopes. We are not talking of producing anything heavier.
Yeah, one question is that I think this, let us take this as the last question. You explained about these plasma treatment of the seeds, but how is it done? So I think it's a plasma torch or something you have for that?
The plasma jet. I showed you a pencil jet, right? Which was being used to, now you can create, this was like a pencil. It's a very thin plasma, but you can always make these like area sources. Yeah. And you could have a conveyor belt on which you put the seeds, which also has a vibrator so that they tend to, you have to cover all the sides of the seed, can't just be one side. And it just moves through this plasma region. Yeah. So you already made some small things as a demonstration for seed and then also for other things.
I think finally for application, instead of the pencil, it has to be some broader line or rectangle with the belt it goes and then, yeah.
In fact, we did that exactly. I told you that during COVID last year, we made a plasma jet. So that's a handheld plasma sterilizer, which has 100 such jets. It's a 10 by 10 matrix, which you can just hold in, like you have your steam iron or something at home. It's like that. You can just hold it up and you can clean a surface with that, sterilize it. So that kind of thing.
I think I'll stop here. So we have taken a lot of your time, and I'm sure it has been very interesting for you as well. Definitely, it was very interesting for me even, and for the students also. It has been kind of a feast for the students in this pandemic time.
I
So,
just a strong outreach program.
yeah.
Nowadays, even in COVID, they are running it virtually. And where lots of colleges, universities from all over the country, they take part in that. So if there's any interest on that part, that can also be organized.
Sure, sure. Yeah, we will see at the graduate level also people are interested in our university as well. And since you are from Dehradun, I think you should visit us definitely whenever you are coming, and we can make a special visit also for us. Our students will be extremely happy, and I also will be glad to interact and try to find out in the area of plasma. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Yeah. So the students, I will like to say thanks to all of you. I hope it is very interesting to all of you. And some of the questions have been answered, and we'll try to see that they are actually answered by our team. But in the meantime, I'd like to display the for the next lecture, who is the person, excitement for the next lecture. And can you display, Siddharth? Please share the screen for the next lecture by, yeah, so next upcoming session is on nanoelectronics, so applying physics to the electronics. And this is no other than Professor Ram Gopal Rao. He is the director of IIT Delhi, Indian Institute of Delhi. So I'll be moderating again, and see you on 26th June at 10 a.m. So this will be weekend especially. So now all our lectures will be on weekend, and I hope you will keep on enjoying this. So thanks to all. Okay.
So there is a poll actually, feedback poll.
Yeah, please. Feedback. Yeah, so this is a small feedback form. You should actually, it will be nice. You can fill it up. There's not too many things. Just for our satisfaction, you can fill it up, and we'll see you on 26th June. Okay. Yeah. So once again, thank you all for joining us. All the best to you, all of you. A nice time, good health, safe time, stay healthy. Okay. Bye bye.